Do, do you think person first language will work over time?
I think it will, and I agree with what Mike is talking about. I think the more we treat each other as people, again, and I think that's where people-centered language comes from. We're all people, with a disability, without a disability. There's so many types of disabilities. But I think it will work. I think it's a sensitivity to what, and under a term of respect, I think, more than anything. Because when a term is used and it gets a bad connotation, it's just used because of a regulation or because of some other services being received, it segregates or it separates people. And that's exactly what you don't want. You don't want to separate people. You might want it for regulation and for funding, but you got to get away from that and look at it as people first, as what it says.
How do you get people to realize that person first language has value and get away from what they've always known, that it is an important thing to the disability community, the mental health community, and all the disability population, whatever it might be?
I think that one thing to do is when you're talking to people on an individual basis or in a group basis is just say that, would you like to be called the wheelchair? There's the wheelchair coming or something like that. And when they say no, you just say, neither would I. Something as simple as that. And I think if you make it, you know, an everyday situation where you're talking to people, I don't think most people have a problem with that. It's just that they don't know.
I'll just add to that too, that from an agency perspective or from a regulatory perspective, again, which I've done for a few years, you've got to include people with disabilities at the table. Mm-hmm. And when you make regulations, when you talk about what you're going to term and use terms, I think people with disabilities have to be involved with that process to make sure there's a discussion about what terms should be used and what terms are more sensitive. Mm-hmm. When you provide services and you don't include people with disabilities in those discussions, whatever level they're at, and I'm talking about the higher levels, and I'm talking about the levels that the direct care staff as well, and the people with disabilities involved together to discuss those kind of things.
And the one thing you got to keep in balance too is that you don't want to make the whole idea so serious that people aren't going to say anything because they're afraid to say anything at all.
So humor helps.
Yeah.
Like, here's one thing I always say when I bring it up. Like when I use the word consumer, to go back to that example, I say I do not consume my service coordinator because she doesn't taste good. I use that example just to prove a point. I might go shopping for groceries because I do consume my groceries, but I don't go out and eat my service coordinator because I would go through them on a regular basis then. You know, it's kind of like that. And then they kind of get that point.
Mm-hmm. When I was working in the mental health field, there was a lot of talk about about person first language, but there was never anything done about it. There was a lot of, okay, so we should be known as, should we be known as consumers, or should we be known as clients, or should we be known as, what should we be known as? And we became known as advocates because of the fact that we were actually advocating for ourselves, and we became peer advocates because of the fact that we were advocating for each other.
So was that a good change for you?
Yes. I feel that being advocates is something that everyone should be. That everyone should know how to advocate for themselves, and everyone should know how to advocate for each other. And within the confines of that, the world would come to a better understanding of what was needed in these systems.
Another question, if I can follow up.
Sure.
What about the issue that comes to mind is, well, the term is not important. We've changed it over the years. We've gone from client, we've gone to consumer, there's other terms and I can't even remember, probably a little less flattering.
Resident.
Resident is one, and then we can go back to history and there's all kind of terms. sometimes you hear in the field that, well, what's politically correct today and what's going to be correct tomorrow. So why are we making a big deal about this? Because it'll change anyway. Tomorrow, the word...
this generation will pick something and the next generation will pick something.
How do you answer that? I mean, how is that a viable argument?
Because it's like the word cool.
Right.
It's like the word groovy. It's like the word. It's like the word advocate, or it's like the word client and consumer. We pick something that fits us. We pick something that fits who we are. Whether it changes later on is not important.
Yeah.
What's important is that it fits us for the moment, and it shows that we have the individuality to know who we are.
And I think you pick something the majority of people right now today want, if you talk to them.
Yeah.
Well, see, it's not necessarily about the word that you use. It's about the respect behind it.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I mean, there may be other words chosen in the future, but as long as we keep the same respect behind the word, it doesn't really matter.
You also asked about whether things will change, and back to that question, I think they will. There was an example last year when we had a self-advocacy meeting with some people from the state of New York, the Office of Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities, which I think in the future that'll change as well.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Right? So we're all in agreement with that. But there was a discussion, and several self-advocates during that discussion where the people that were representing the Quality Assurance Department were talking about consumers, and the people, the self-advocates expressed themselves and told the people there that they weren't interested. They'd rather be people first and be identified as people first. Those two people from New York State went back and in their office changed the wording of the document that they were handing out to put individuals. So, I mean, at least that's a small step, but it was something that they listened, that the self-advocates, I think, play a key role in this, or the advocates, that to talk about it and to bring it up at meetings, to bring it up with people that represent the regulation people. And some of the people there will answer and will change the process. It'll take some time. But that's one part of it, and the other part is the general community, as you guys talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mike, I have an interesting question for you.
Push that.
There was a conference I went to, and this is what I'm waiting to see in other conferences, where services, we were talking about how the word consumer was used to mean people who go out and purchase their services. We were talking a little bit about that, I think. And I'm waiting to see, I went to a conference in Atlanta where there was a room set aside for services. And you could go in there and you could look at all the services that were provided, and you could say, I want that one, or go back to your city if it was in your city and say, I want that one, or I want this one, or I'm going to look up this one, or this one, or this one. And if you could do that, if you could go back to they have vendor networking.
Yeah.
But I've been to vendor networking where I was actually a vendor, and I didn't see anyone coming in there who was a quote-unquote consumer, or quote-unquote someone who needed services or was supposed to get services or receive services. I saw vendors helping vendors, and vendors selling to other vendors.
Like patting each other on the back saying, I'll help you out, but I won't help the people who are supposed to be receiving services.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting to see when that will change. When the word consumer will come into style, where it actually means that we actually go into a room or wherever, and we do pick our services. We do find out what we need from the horse's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like I equate it to this, like when you live in an agency home or an agency residence, you're told where to go. You don't really have a choice. You'd like to think you do, but you really don't. Like you could say you don't like this physical therapy or this doctor, but it's more convenient for staff time to take you here because then it'll maximize staff time.
Yes. I was living in a single room occupancy where they told us that you have to do something, as they put it, constructive throughout the day. But it wasn't really, we have to do something constructive. It was, we just don't want you here between this hour and this hour so that we can get our paperwork done, which was a mountain of paperwork.